Hey everyone, it's the History Nerd back for another episode of the Gods and Kings Ethiopia playthrough. So first off, right off the bat, I'm going to apologize. Um, this afternoon, my work took us out to see Batman for the afternoon. We just as a reward for our recent software release. So that was fun. Afterwards, we went to the pub and I had a couple pints. So, I'm going to be a bit looser with my tongue, probably. It gets dangerous considering the questions that have been asked this week. Uh, yeah. So, without further ado, and with my cat screaming in the background, let's get to the questions. So, first things first, Twin Dot, my opinion of the British Empire as a Canadian. Thank you for adding that as a Canadian bit, because it really does play into quite a bit of this. From a colonial perspective, Canada had it fairly easily. Fairly easily? Fairly easy? That sounds better. I've got a fairly good opinion of the British Empire. I think as far as empires go, uh, they were okay. They were probably better than a lot of them. That's not to say they were good. They weren't. They were still a freaking empire, and they still pushed their will and their desires on other people. This is what empires do. It's something that historically we can't get around. They just do this. So, taking that into consideration, I think the British Empire was one of the best empires the world has ever seen. Yes, they were violent, yes, they were colonial bastards, and yes, they killed a lot of people. But, there's a trade-off. And they also brought... They were able to export their idea of democracy to a lot of places in the world that would have taken much, much longer for these ideas to come. Now, if you look at it, if you take a look, for example, take a look globally at the Commonwealth nations, and there are a few out there that are bad apples, no question about it, and this certainly is not a blanket statement, this does not apply to every single Commonwealth nation throughout history. I mean, you can take a look at South Africa. Right there, we can invalidate pretty much whatever I'm saying. But, if you take a look at former British colonies, they're fairly democratic. They're fairly modern in their institutions. And at this stage of the game, they're not wholly following, a lot of them aren't wholly following the Westminster system. They've developed a blending of the democratic ideals of the British system along with ideals that fit into their culture. And out of this, we've got quite a lot of nations around the world that are far more free than I think they would be had they not been ruled by Britain. Now, again, this is coming from a Canadian. We have a very unique colonial experience with Britain. I think everybody who's watching this is familiar with the Revolutionary War, the American Revolutionary War. During this time, you still, in the American colonies, you had British loyalists. And when the Revolution started, they came to Canada to remain, quote-unquote, subjects of the crown. Now, why would they do this? Because it's what they believed in. It's what they wanted. And sometimes, my opinion is, sorry if I just hit the microphone. Again, couple of pints, I'm kind of getting hand talky. Uh, my opinion is the British parliamentary system allows, well, the development and the growth of these systems is generally slower. Banking. It allows for a less violent and more socially acceptable way for cultural changes to take place. The example I use to explain this is the question of slavery. Now, the American Civil War was fought between 1861 and 1865, and one of the key issues, it wasn't the only issue, but one of the key issues of this change, or of that Civil War, was the issue of slavery. Now, in 1821, thank you, the British Empire got rid of it. The British Empire outlawed slavery in 1821. So you've got to take a look at it, and you've got to ask yourself, if Britain was as repressive as it was, why then were they able to get rid of an institution like slavery 40 years before the quote-unquote freest nation on earth had to fight a civil war over these same issues? My simple answer is the Westminster system, the parliamentary system, that sort of limited and structured democracy that's advanced and changed throughout the years, allows society to accept these kind of changes a lot better than, say, a purely democratic or a republican type of system. And again, it's not to say that the British model is right and the American/French model is wrong or anything like this. It's just, in my own personal opinion, I'm a fan of, again, not as nations go, but as empires go, as world-spanning empires go. Britain was bad, but there's been worse, and I think they found, and I mean, it wasn't even like they were looking for it, but just through their institutions, through their way of working. Oh, excellent. They found a way to keep that balancing act going to the point where things were changing, things were advancing, and society moves on. But there's not the need for violent, angry revolutions to ensure that people retain their freedom and aren't trampled on through excessive tyranny. And I think the word excessive there is key. Because no matter what sort of political system we as humans live in, there's always going to be an aspect of tyranny. When a group of people decide that certain people, whether they be elected officials or military members who grab power or whatever, when we give these people power, we're basically inviting tyranny. And I think a responsible parliament and here's the critical thing, and a lot of people will disagree with me on this, so I welcome the counterpoints, but with an unelected upper body, the House of Lords. In Canada, we have the same thing in our Senate. Our Senate is not elected, they're appointed. The way we do it in Canada is a bit wrong. They're appointed by the Prime Minister. So the people that get appointed usually have political connections to at least a political party, if not a political individual. This is not a good thing for unelected bodies, because you get the conflict of interests where these people are placed in their position because of someone connected to a political party. This instantly means that you're developing political ties with an unelected individual. So basically, your unelected individual has just got a free ride as they're supporting their political party. What you need is a wholly unelected body. Now, a lot of people are going to say, that doesn't sound right. It's better to have elected officials represent you. The problem is, elected officials can succumb to mob rule. And that's where it gets dangerous. Because you're assuming, come on, that what the mob wants is right. A lot of times it isn't. And when you have an unelected body who isn't dependent on popular opinion to keep their position in power, then they're much more effective at their job. The problem is they're not elected, so how are they held accountable? What happens in situations where these powers are abused? Or, I mean, there's tons of situations that can come up, and the trick there is there's just no perfect system. I think the Westminster system of Great Britain is the best balancing act for it. Sure, you're not always as free.
In a trade agreement with England?
Yes, we would, England. After I'm talking up your empire, it would be wrong of me to refuse this. You see, this is what a couple of after-work pints do. Completely lost track of my train of thought. That train has gone off the rails. But Westminster system, I think that's the greatest gift that the British Empire gave an awful lot of countries in this world. And I mean, it doesn't excuse colonial activities, and it doesn't say,
in a trade agreement with England?
that what the British did in their colonial rules of certain countries, that's okay. It isn't. But we can't. When looking at history, it's important to take the good with the bad. And again, it's not saying that they're perfect, but as far as empires go, Britain was pretty good.
In a trade agreement?
And yeah. As a Canadian, I mean, you've got to remember our colonial experience. I think I started on this when I started talking about the people coming up from the American Revolution into Canada. We're a country built on loyalists to the crown. That's part of our national history, and it's part of our national heritage. We still have the Queen as our head of state. A lot of people don't understand that. But it's part of our identity. And really, if we weren't, if you take a look at our society compared to American society, if we didn't have these few little hangers-on of what British society was, then we'd just be American. And as a Canadian, like I can understand how that would come about. As a Canadian, I'm glad it hasn't. I'm glad we've kept those ties, and it worries me when I hear people say, let's get rid of the monarchy. The monarchy is one of the few things that keeps us distinct and separate. And the moment we get rid of that, really, we wouldn't be as unique. We wouldn't be as separate. We would basically be Americans in a colder climate. Now, I'm not saying there's anything wrong with Americans. I quite like Americans, but I like the fact that I'm Canadian, and I like having that difference. I think that difference is necessary. And that's part of the reason why I'm such a fan of the British Empire. Plus, our colonial experience, you can go to places like India, you can go to places like South Africa, places where there were bad colonial experiences, and you will get a completely and totally different answer. The fact is, in Canada, we didn't have it that bad. There were issues with the native population, absolutely, and there was massive mistreatment of the native population, without a doubt. which happens in any imperial system where people come from afar and subjugate their will over others. When it comes to our experience as a colony, we were always left pretty much alone. We were always left to do basically what we wanted. I'm just gonna blow my nose, hold on. It's in the 1850s that a delegate from Great Britain came to Canada, saw what we were doing, saw our response, and returned and said, you know, the best thing for Canada is to give them home rule. And, you know, it kind of was. Slowly but surely, we worked towards getting our own freedom. And for a very, very long time, sure, initially we had prime ministers appointed from England. We had governor generals appointed from England. But slowly, we grew out of that. Slowly but surely, we got to the point where, indeed, we were capable and able to rule ourselves internally. And then, after the First World War, when we had shown to the world that, you know, I mean, the Second World War is big for America, the First World War is big for Canadians. And if you're a Canadian and it isn't, you really should look into what we did in that war and start celebrating it. When no other troops could achieve a victory in the trenches, the Canadians could. We became the British shock troops. Well, the thing that always brings a smile and a tear to my face is when Germans heard that Canadians were in the trenches opposite of them, they actually got scared. And that's kind of cool for a tiny little country like ours. To think that first off, bizarre statement. If you take that out of context, I sound like an insane person. But you know, it's something that Canadians it's never equated to our country. But we do make incredibly good soldiers. And it was through that war that we really developed our national identity. And, you know, shortly after that war, with the Statute of Westminster, we became de facto our own nation. We were finally given the ability to deal in our own foreign affairs, which is why we joined World War I a week late. We made the Brits wait a week before we were like, yeah, okay, Canada's coming. And then those, to be fair, after I've been talking these guys up like crazy, to be fair, those assholes of the Brits sent us to Hong Kong to protect against the Japanese onslaught, and we obviously we weren't able to hold it. But you know, it's a different mentality, Canada between America. And this is also kind of the frustrating thing. Whenever you talk to a Canadian about what it means to be Canadian, we always compare it to Americans, and it's unfortunate. I wish we didn't have to, but in our heads we do, because they're the big guys. They're the successful story of the 20th century, and here we are. Hey, it's Beardy. How's it going, Sweden? Let's see. Have we got anything you want? We got crabs. Copper. Yay! That's just what we do. But I think it's the ties to Britain and Canada's unique. And America! What have you got? You want some crabs? You want some crabs? You already have crabs.
Go ahead.
Okay. Cool. We got nothing to trade with you. Man, I lost my train of thought. Washington just threw me for a loop. Don't remember what I was talking about. Something about Canadians and our unique experience with Britain. It's like I say, as far as world empires go, Britain gets one thumb up for me. They did a lot of bad things, but ultimately they did a lot of good things. And I think we have a tendency to forget the good things and focus on the bad things when looking at history. It's just the way humans work, and it's unfortunate, you know, but it is what it is. So, yeah. Go Britain. But again, I'm not trying to say they were wonderful and amazing. They were assholes. Totally, surely, for sure they were. And any empire is. But there you go. A long-winded and rambling explanation that I hope makes sense.
Is the following trade?
Yeah. So moving on to Matt. I find ice cubes in a hat actually work really, really well. I discovered this in university. It does kind of get the head a bit extra cold, but man, it cools you off. And then your sweat is also cool, which is crazy. That's kind of a cool feeling. And yeah, and I agree with your comment about the Muslim Islamic history being that they're just a bunch of assholes who come along and kill everybody. What you need to do, and unfortunately right now I'm blanking, but you need to find some translated Islamic sources to get a good view of Islamic history that isn't... Basically, any source you get written by a Western source is gonna be bad. It's gonna look at them in a negative light. The reason is, we've been enemies for a very, very long time. The West and the Islamic world, you know, sometimes we get along okay, sometimes we don't, but, you know, we've been enemies for pretty much most of the contact we've had with them. So what you need to do is find sources written by them, and there should be tons that have been translated by now, I would imagine. I would be shocked if you're unable to find anything. And that'll give you a good understanding. Also, don't forget that while you're reading those, also be sure, if you're not aware of the historical time that you're looking at, take a look at Western sources too, because the truth in history is always going to be somewhere between the two written sources, and that's really the big trick of history, is that whoever writes it is writing it because they're the victor, and they're going to have that bias in there. Now, as time develops, as history becomes more of a science, quote-unquote science, and becomes more academic, you're going to get a bit less of that, but it's always going to be present in no matter what you read. So tackle both sides of the story, the truth somewhere in the middle, and yeah, hopefully it becomes apparent somehow. That's a long voyage around. So that's my suggestion. And it's a shame history is like that, but history is like that, and it's just something that anybody who's interested in history has to be cognizant of, and should be sure that when they're looking at it, that's something they keep in the front of their mind, not even the back of your mind. Constantly be thinking about the motivations of the person who wrote this history and why they wrote it the way they did. Because nobody writes it just for posterity. Nobody writes it just to keep it. Everybody writes history. Everybody who writes history has a motivation to write it. So just, remember that while you're reading, and get as many sources and as a diverse amount of sources as you possibly can. And yeah, that'll give you a better understanding of the historical time, the historical area, the historical pretty much everything. So there's my little rant on history. What have you got, Nebuchadnezzar? Do you want some crabs? But you got nothing to give me for crabs. So I'm not giving you crabs. And then finally we get to Ialces. First off, your German question. Yes, terribly sorry I missed that. I was far more concerned with how you would respond to my atheist question, or my atheist answer. That was kind of making me nervous. And your next question is also kind of making me a bit nervous. I'm going to tackle Germany first. I'm a bit more comfortable talking about this. So initially, yeah, I mean, German industry was great. It was amazing. German science was great. It was amazing. The problem was they had no raw materials. And once you start fighting a war, especially if you take a look at Germany's geographical position, they had one outlet that went basically right into England. And at the start of World War II, England still had a very massive navy. England had a very good air force. So trade was pretty limited. They got a lot of raw materials from the Soviet Union, but once they invaded the Soviet Union, that kind of didn't mean anything. And they got some raw materials from Norway, Sweden, Finland, and that sort of area. But they really didn't get the materials they needed to be able to fight. Plus, once the Allies started bombing the shit out of German industry, that pretty much put an end. Well, not put an end. The Germans were very resourceful in moving a lot of their manufacturing facilities underground. If you go into Poland, there are still quite a lot of areas there that, you can go into quarries that still have some old machinery kicking around. They still have, there still is quite a bit going on. Well, not... Scratch that. There's nothing going on. There's quite a lot of artifacts. And it's really interesting to see. I haven't seen it personally, I've just seen pictures of it, but it looks really, really cool. But by that time, especially once America fully entered the war, before they entered the war and they were basically, they were kind of building for both sides. It was... No, I've got a scientist, so... Yeah, more happiness, why not? So that was kind of leveling, but once America came into it, you can forget it. And once the Soviet Union got their production in full swing, basically at the start of the war, they were busy shifting all of their manufacturing away from the front lines and into the interior. So once they got that on the go, I mean, Germany's... There's no chance. There's just no chance for it. What the hell? Who is this? America? Coming all up in my grill? What? 17 followers of Christianity now? This is ridiculous.
There never was a good knife made. Well,
absolutely ridiculous. I guess we could at least upgrade him. Okay, yeah. No, that's exactly the window I wanted to go. You're going to Washington. Can't believe they just waltzed in here and they were like, yo, by the way, 17 of your people are now Christian, and only one of them is Pastafarian. Insanity. Not enough faith. Arg. Oh, we'll get you back. We will get you back. Yeah, so once both the future superpowers came into it, forget it. Germany couldn't compete. And, yeah, so at the start of the war, 1938, 1939, economically, they're doing great. By mid-war, by 42, when the states were in it, and things started to kick off against the Soviets, forget it. Nazi Germany couldn't do it. Lack of raw materials was massive, but it wasn't the only factor. Just competing with the population base. I mean, you have Germany, which wasn't all that populated. Even Greater Germany, once they absorbed Austria, they didn't have the population to combat two superpowers, especially while they were busy killing off a good segment of that population. So, 38, 39, economically, yes. By 42, not a chance in hell. Speaking of hell, why am I an atheist? Originally, I was just going to tiptoe around this, but I've had some drinks, so maybe I'll still tiptoe around it. That's a very interesting question. Why am I an atheist? I wasn't raised religious. That's why. I wasn't raised with the stories. I wasn't raised with the tradition. I wasn't raised with the interaction. All of that stuff. That stuff is completely 100% foreign to me. It's just not a part of me. I don't understand it. That's what's going on there. I did not want to work boat. Now, you mentioned evidence. I don't see any evidence for it. That's the thing.
Would you be interested in a...
Is that I look at things, especially things that happened in history, I look at those things with a critical eye. And I don't see the proof that a lot of people see. I don't... To put it bluntly, I don't even know if I think Jesus was a real person. Alexander! Do you want crabs? Whoa. Yeah, you want crabs. We want gems. So yeah, I probably already put my foot in my mouth with that one. But it's true. The historical evidence for him isn't enough for me to believe he was real. There's more evidence to prove that Achilles was a real person. And I don't believe Achilles was a real person.
It is well.
When I see... Yeah, you know what? I'm going to leave it there. I'm going to leave it there. I've said enough. I've said more than enough. Yeah, I've said enough. That's it. That's that. I think that's an okay place to leave it. If it isn't, if you want to continue this discussion, send me a personal message. Send me a private message on YouTube. And we can discuss this further if you want. I don't necessarily want to. But if you want to, I'll continue. I don't know if it's really the best thing to put over top of me playing a Civ game. I don't know. Maybe I'm completely off base. Maybe this is what you guys want to see and hear. And, yeah, I'm much more comfortable. This is what it is. I'm much more comfortable.
Trade agreement with England.
But I don't have any crabs left, woman. You're taking the last of my crabs! Oh, no, you're not. Okay, yeah, they're yours. Well, do you have anything for me? You don't. Okay. I prefer talking about history. And I'm fine talking about... Let's see what these guys are going on. Pretty cool looking unit. I'm fine talking about religious events through history, right? So like I'm totally fine talking about the Crusades. I'm totally fine talking about anything historical. Personal beliefs get touchy. Personal beliefs are personal, and in my opinion, they're personal for a reason. And they shouldn't factor in at all. Like, IEL says, you're a Christian? That's cool. That's awesome. I don't want to change that. I don't want to argue that. I don't want to do anything to that. That's a choice you've made and it works for you, and that's great. That's awesome. I didn't make the same choice. And if like, you know, that should be all there is to it. If that makes sense. Yeah. Yeah. So that's what's going on there. Never was a part of it, never grew up with it. And from what I've seen, there's not enough out there to convince me. That's pretty much it when it comes to religion. Again, if you want to continue, send me a message. We can talk about this in private all you want. I'm okay with that. I just don't know if it's really the type of thing that makes for good conversation while I'm playing a Civ game. So I can tell you, getting back to the game, I'm not thinking about going all Stalin on my cities. The reason why, I mean, Addis Ababa, 24, you guys were saying 15 to 20, but my happiness is through the roof. And I think because all my other cities are pretty tiny, although, I mean, I guess Adwa and Harar there are kind of getting bigger. Salzburg is staying nice and tiny. Thank you, Salzburg. Yeah, we get it. Cool. You don't like us. We understand, Austria. Things are rough between us. Eh. No! Oh, Civ, why don't you come with an undo button? Frustrating. So, keeping with the peaceful outlook of this game, I'm just gonna try and keep my head low and build up Ethiopia. Workshop. Windmill. Come on, get over there. Why are you... Oh. So frustrating. Oh, I think I can get... So, since this is the holy city for Pastafarianism... wow. Ugh, that's a mouthful. Whatever I build there should be... I'm not even going to take the risk. We're just doing that. Because I know he'll be Pastafarian. Conduct a trade mission with Lisbon. What unit needs orders? Come on. Okay. Okay, well, I think I'm going to leave it here today. Yeah, we'll leave it here for now. Save there. Save my backup. Alright. Well, if you guys have enjoyed this episode, please give me a thumbs up. Especially for this episode, I want to hear comments from this. Yeah. That's pretty much all I've got. So comments, questions, concerns, especially concerns, follow-up questions, points of discussion, what you thought of this, and is this what you guys want to see? Because I can rant about religion a lot. I don't want to, but I can. I'd much rather rant about history. If you guys prefer that, I would prefer that. But, you know, you guys are the viewer. You guys have a say in what I do. You guys are my advisors. So whatever you guys want to see, let me know. And I will do my best to give it to you. That's pretty much it. So thumbs up if you like this. Leave your comments, questions, concerns, jokes, musings, what you guys want to see below. And thank you all very, very much for watching. We'll see you next time.